Welcome to episode 40 of the Luke Macias Show. We have got a great conversation to bring to you today, and very timely in regards to just a current issue that's bubbled up to the top of the cultural debate, and Texas is on the tip of the spear. We're leading the way. And unfortunately, we're also leading the way when it comes to cases in the courts where parents' rights are trying to be removed, but we're also seemingly leading the way in saying no to that. And that's thanks to a Democrat judge's ruling to overrule the jury and to give Jeff Younger, the father of 7-year-old James Younger, the right to veto the transgender brainwashing of his child. And so I just want to tell you what we're going to talk about today, because it's pretty important. Just to give context, we were really excited when last week Matt Walsh and then Ben Shapiro brought up to a lot of people the case of Jeff and James Younger. And they asked the governor publicly, what are you going to do about this? And Governor Abbott responded, and we're really grateful for their willingness to ask him publicly so that he could be in a position to respond and tell everyone that he had the Attorney General and CPS looking into the James Younger situation. And so that brings up kind of today's story, which is a conversation with Krista McIntire, who is a tireless leading advocate for parents when it comes to CPS issues. We sit down with Krista today and we talk about a case that she was involved in where CPS, and this is this year, where CPS pushed transgender ideology on parents, literally encouraging them to push confusing, unscientific, sexual, really just experimentation on their child through transgender ideology. And so we bring this story to you in a conversation with Krista McIntire. It's really important because, the governor, I don't think knew when he said, DFPS is looking into this issue, Texas's CPS agency is looking into the case of James Younger. I don't think that he in any way suspected that CPS is maybe a little bit tainted on this issue, that they are a state agency that seems to have at least some people. And there's some troubling facts that you're going to find out if you just listen to this 20-minute conversation we had. In fact, when the CPS showed up to the family, because one of the accusations specifically was that they weren't encouraging the gender transition of their child, they had a special caseworker that they actually said specialized in these type of issues. And then they provided the parents with some materials, and those will be on the post that we post with this episode. You'll be able to see those materials that they gave them that actually encouraged them to push the child into programs that would further lie to them and further encourage them to try to be a gender other than the gender that they are. And so, again, I don't think our statewide officials are aware of what CPS is doing, and our goal in bringing you this story today is that we can start the conversation, and so that Texas state officials can jump into action and start asking CPS some questions, because I think following Texans listening to this episode, they're going to have some questions for CPS. This is our taxpayer dollars. So for those of you who purchase things, for those of you who pay franchise taxes, for those of you who, write your tax bill on a regular basis and send the government your licensing fees and all of that, know that that money is actually getting used to hire state employees that are going to families' homes and telling them to transition their children. They are telling them to be part of the radical sexual revolution and that is attempting to try to transition children. And the James Younger situation is kind of the worst of the worst, right? It's a child who at 3 years old had his mother telling him that he was a girl, and dressing him up in dresses and painting his fingernails and doing other things that come with psychologically conditioning or brainwashing a small child into believing something that the adults in the room have conspired to convince them of. And so for those of you who haven't followed that story, you can go back. Our very first episode of this podcast was a conversation with Jeff Younger that you can watch and further understand that story. But I really wanted to take this to the next level because James is one of hundreds of children. So his particular case was brought up to us last week, and it gained a lot of attention, and a lot of people saw the stuff that we had done on that and began sharing it with their friends, and we're very grateful for that. But this is one of hundreds of situations, and so our goal is to continue to bring you more information so that you can be aware of just how deep this battle is, and how wide it is, and how many issues we have and how many fronts we have to fight. So with nothing further ado, I'm going to move directly on to the conversation with Krista McIntire after a quick word from our sponsor. Thank you. So, Krista McIntire, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I'm really grateful that you actually took time to drive all the way here into Fort Worth to sit down and talk with me about what I think is probably a really big issue. To give listeners, our listeners and watchers, viewers, a little bit of background, can you just tell us a little bit about what you end up spending, other than being a wife and a mother and taking care of your family? What ends up taking a lot of your time with the organization you're involved in?
So family rights advocacy started out as just lobbying for parental rights in regards to anything related to parental rights. And we turned into a CPS group. We had families calling us asking, what do we do? And when we first started, I didn't know, but we started just kind of digging our heels in and trying to figure out what was going on. And we saw a lot of corruption and a lot of parental rights being totally messed with, a lack of due process, a lack of accountability within the department. And so we now help families under CPS investigation, and we help them to be successful. We help their children from being traumatized, and we hold the department accountable.
So we're going to have you back to have kind of a longer conversation about CPS cases, CPS reform, and all these different issues when it comes to parental rights. That's an issue I think we all care about a lot. We all have kids, even the ones that don't have kids that think about having kids, or have other kids that are grown and have other kids.
Yes.
It affects everyone. And so we want to talk about that more, but I reached out to you because I had recalled a story you had told me. There's this controversial case in DFW regarding a young boy who's 7 years old, whose mother's transitioning him against his father's permission. And that is an issue we've covered a lot on our podcast. And so anyways, it came to a head this last week in the court system. And we saw that Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, ended up putting pressure on our governor to say something about it. And our governor reacted, and we're very appreciative of that. So he went out and said, Texans, I want everyone to know that I've directed DFPS and the Attorney General's office. They're both looking into this issue. Right. I should read his tweet. I don't want to, misquote him, but he basically said, DFPS and the AG are looking into it. Don't worry. Right. I mean, not don't worry, but just they're getting involved. And so, just to make sure people watching this know that what ended up happening in that case is the judge, who's a Democrat elected judge, ended up overturning the jury and giving the father essentially veto authority over the transitionary therapy that his son's getting. So both parents have to agree. They don't right now. So his 7-year-old son won't be, further transitioned to be a girl. But I found it really important. James is this young boy who's one of a lot of children in Texas that are in this situation. Yeah. And so you are familiar with a situation regarding CPS and the transgender issue. Yeah. And when Governor Abbott tweeted that out, the DFPS was looking into it. I thought it only appropriate that at this time we bring some information to Texans about kind of how CPS has maybe handled this issue before. And so why don't you, that's my passing the torch to you to tell us whatever you can tell us. I know we're not going to talk about this family's name, where they're from, anything like that. We don't want to, they love their child as well, and there's no reason to bring them specifically into this, but you're somebody who's been handling, working with hundreds of families, dozens of families all across the state. So tell us about this particular case and how CPS handled the issue of transgender ideology.
Yeah, so when Governor Abbott put out the information that he was involving DFPS, I know many reactions were great. He's doing something. And if they only knew what goes on with the department, they would have paused like I did. Unfortunately, DFPS, in my experience, when you have a child who wants to transition or a child that has a gender dysphoria and CPS gets involved, in my experience, they encourage the child to do so, and they encourage the parents to do so. And if they don't, then there are consequences. So the family that I had, they reached out to me. They knew they were under investigation, and they wanted to know their rights. They wanted to know, how to handle it. And in any investigation, children being interviewed is traumatic. And so we don't always advise our families to go through with an interview. So this particular child said, that he wanted to be a girl. He wanted to be called something different than what he was.
And this is a child in their teens,
Yes.
like kind of, mid-teens
Yes.
range. Okay.
It was
Just to provide context.
Yes, it was a teenager. And he called CPS himself. And I'm going to get back to why that's important. So remind me if I forget. But
Okay.
he called CPS himself. And when the parents called me, I kind of went over everything, and we arranged for CPS to come to the home.
Yep.
Part of the allegations were that he was not being fed. So it was, he's not being fed, and he's not being able to transition into a girl and be accepted as a girl. So this was my first case like this. Every case that I had before that was pretty standard child abuse and neglect.
Yes.
And so I had invited a couple of more people with me to serve as witnesses, and there was an attorney and another advocate there. And CPS, whenever they come, they usually come with one investigator. They brought two.
Okay.
And when the department brings two, and I'm not aware of it when it's happening, I will make the second investigator stay in the car. And so that's what we did. We came to the door, let him in, and I said, "I'm so sorry. You're gonna have to stay in the car. Wasn't aware that you were coming. I don't know who you are. The family doesn't know who you are."
Yep.
And the original caseworker said, no, she's got special training in these types of allegations. And normally I would have said, that's great, you can go sit in the car. But this was new to me, and I wanted to see what she had to offer the family.
And I guess what you further learned is that when they said specific training in these, they weren't referring to the food.
Correct.
Right? She's not like a food expert.
She's not a food expert.
Okay.
No. So they came in, and this family was under an alternative response investigation.
Okay.
So there's technical allegations, which are not letting him, or not accepting him as a girl, not letting him transition, and then not feeding him. Alternative response, the department will sell this to the state as this is a less traumatic experience for the family. We're going to investigate you because there aren't really allegations of child abuse and neglect, but we believe that you have the potential to be a child abuser.
Got it.
So they come in and they offer help because the government definitely knows how to raise your children for you. So we're going to provide you with these resources to help you raise your children. So they came in and they went over the allegations, and then they provided services. Now, in an alternative response case, you do not have to accept the services that they provide.
Yep.
The services that they provide, it was a 2-page document, and it had multiple classes on drag, LGBT. I mean, a range of options for the family to choose, but none of them were outside of this
ideology.
Yes. And so while we were there and they offered these services, I said, let's go on to the food. We need to address the allegations of the food. Would you like to look in the pantry? Would you like to look in the refrigerator? Because that's standard. No, we're good.
And so standard meaning that normally if there's an abuse claim that somebody's not being fed, you'd look in the pantry, you'd look in the fridge, you'd say, hey, do we know that this child is receiving the nourishment that he or she needs?
Right. And in an alternative response case, sometimes when somebody says I'm not being fed, it's because the family's poor.
Got it.
So even though poor is not child abuse and neglect, it is very normal for CPS to come in and say, can we look in your pantry and your fridge under those allegations? So they repeatedly said, no, we don't need to see the pantry. We don't need to see the fridge. And they just wanted to focus on these services. So the way we do things when the department offers services is we ask the family outside of the department's presence, what kind of services do you want for your family? These are your children. Your child is possibly struggling with something, and you're in charge. So what would you like to do? So they picked counseling services on their own. They picked independent counseling services on their own, and they attended them. And we provided multiple letters and documentation that this family was sending their child to their preferred counselor. Now, in an alternative response, if you deny the services, they have the ability to transition it to a traditional investigation, which means there are allegations, there's a disposition, and you have the possibility of being on a child abuser registry. So because the family denied these, services, eventually they got put into a traditional investigation. Now, CPS didn't tell the family that that's what they were going to do, which is no surprise to anybody. They don't follow their own rules. So we didn't know that was the direction it was going because they never told us or the family. But they ended up getting an unable to determine. And most people, including legislators, believe that if you get a reason to believe, which is CPS's version of guilty, then that is the disposition that lands you on a child abuser registry. But all of them land you on the child abuser registry except for ruled out. And even ruled out, you're still in a database forever.
So unable to determine means we think this person might be abusing their child.
Well,
meaning we can neither confirm nor deny. Isn't that right?
Yes.
I mean, meaning if I say I can neither confirm nor deny, it means I think it might be happening, but I can't prove it.
Yes, which is unconstitutional in every way. But
I know you and I've been involved in a number of CPS cases, just from involvement on the parent side, not personally, but with other people who have had these accusations made against them and who have also received this letter unable to determine. That's when I realized that they can kind of punish you.
Yes, it's retaliation.
For not giving them 120% access to everything they want, doing exactly what they tell you to do, going to the pro-transitionary therapy that they potentially recommend that you look into, for not letting them direct how you exactly should parent. They can basically punish you and say, we don't know if you're an abuser. And now you're on a database that says you might abuse your kids. You might not. You might.
Maybe.
We're not sure.
But if the family gets another CPS report from a vindictive neighbor, from anything, the way that family is treated during the next CPS investigation, it's very aggressive. And, we have this misunderstanding that we have rights, and we do have a constitutional right to say no to all the demands of the department. But they retaliate, and they have the ability to retaliate. So it's this, art of compromise. And with that particular family that was dealing with this, they did everything right. They provided the department with services that they were involved in. They let the family in the home, and certain circumstances I won't let.
They let the agency.
Or excuse me, they let the agency in the home.
I know. I was just making sure.
But certain circumstances I won't let the agency in the home. But they had the food. Where the child's not eating. So you need to. We have to let them in to see it, and they weren't concerned about the food. They were only concerned about.
Now I want to clarify for our listeners and viewers. When you say they had services they were providing, you're not referring to like CPS has its own services that are pushing the transgender ideology, as much as there was documentation. And you have a picture of this document on your Facebook page. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not on the public page. It's on my personal page, but we can get those to you.
Yeah, why don't you get that to us, and we will we'll just publish the picture of those documents with this conversation so that people can see the reality that, and I just want to kind of take a step back into the irony, because I don't think Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, any of them knew, right?
They didn't
But
know.
none of them knew before that the agency that our officials who I think generally agree. I mean, Donald Trump Jr. said this is child abuse, right? I mean, it's not just a couple of us here. There are a lot of different officials all across the state. In fact, you could even argue that the Democrat judge in this particular case in Dallas saw that there were some negative effects and potential consequences, and she stepped in and said, I want both parents to have a say in this. So, she didn't even advocate necessarily for one side. And so in this situation, the hope, and I'm so grateful for you coming on and having this conversation, because I think that our officials in Texas want to know if CPS is sitting down with a family. And I just want to recap this, and you tell me if I don't want to say anything out of turn or inaccurate, but CPS had a child, a hurting child. You could say, somebody who's clearly dealing with a lot of different issues and struggling. And this is not the community of children who are struggling with gender dysphoria, we know are serious issues, right? I mean, these children are more likely to attempt to kill themselves than any other subset of children we are familiar with in this nation. And so this is not anything to demonize. In fact, these children are victims within this situation. And so you have a child who's greatly hurting, in a lot of pain, and they decide to report their parents to CPS with 2 allegations. This child, they're not encouraging my transgender transitioning, and they're not feeding me. Right. CPS responds. They bring 2 people, not 1, and they say that. So evidently, their claim is that they have somebody at CPS that is specially trained. They said it, within the transgender ideology. I mean, they would probably say it differently, but that's essentially what they claim is we've got somebody who knows more about this. And then that person, these 2 individuals then tell the parents, spend very little time talking about the fact that their child says he's not fed. Right. And instead say, we really want to know about this. And here is some information that is going to point you to the affirmation transgender ideology. Right. And that's what we are encouraging you. The state of Texas. The state of Texas. We employees paid by all of us, our tax dollars. We are paying people to go into people's homes and tell them, you need to transition your child. And if you don't transition your child, we're going to punish you by giving you an unable to determine whether you are or are not an abuser and putting you permanently on the child abuser registry.
Yeah. I mean, it would be different if I would still be irritated, but it would have been a little bit better if they would have provided different options for these services.
You could go this way or this way.
They did, and nor did they ask the parents, what do you want to do to help your child? That was never asked. And it's never asked, by the way, in any case. But they were never asked anything like that. And I had mentioned coming back to this. And so while it's on my mind.
Yes. He reported
himself. Yes. And later on, after the investigation was over, they found out that there were 2 individuals at school that were encouraging him to do this. And I think that's important because we have our organization has a multitude of parents calling us that are not in CPS yet. They're calling us because their children are threatening them with CPS. Now, I know when I was young, I wanted to wear certain things. I wanted to do certain things. And if somebody had told me that all I have to do is call CPS and I can get my way, come on. We can't be weaponizing this with, our children. And so I think that's important. Because the department is encouraging it as well.
Yeah, I think I would... I don't know if my mom or dad would be happy with this, but I know that at some point when I was 6 or 7, I probably definitely threatened to call CPS at some point. And that's not because my parents are 2 of the most loving people in the world, and they're amazing parents and grandparents, and they did such an amazing job providing us not only a nurturing environment, but just amazing love, care, and affection. Right. You couldn't get better parents than I have. And I think my dad, if he's watching or listening to this, may even remember that some episode, but I know at some point I was I'm going to call CPS on you, because I was ticked at something.
Sure, so we're all kids.
That's normal. Right. And it's sad. So in this case, you're saying this guy was encouraged by people at school to call. Do we think, and I don't know the facts, but is the assumption that these were peers? Or?
They were peers.
Okay. So it wasn't teachers at the school
that we know of.
Yeah.
But understood. It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. But no,
we
these
could play
were
the
other
unable
peers.
to determine.
Right.
We're unable to determine whether his principal. Okay.
Yeah.
We won't play that game. So we think these ones were peers of his that were saying,
yes, you need to call.
You need to call.
Yes. Yeah. And these peers were they were lesbians they were proclaimed lesbians. And again, this is not, to me, it's not a matter of transgender, lesbian, gay. It's a matter of the government telling a parent that they need to encourage whatever behavior. I don't care what it is. That's not the government's job. But if you have two teens of another family who might be struggling with their own stuff, or their parents are okay with it, and that's fine. That's their parents', job. But we're encouraging this child to do it, and then they call CPS, and now we have a big disaster. And CPS does global investigating, which I know we're supposed to talk about that later. So I'll just
later.
Leave
we
that
won't
alone.
Go too far.
Yeah.
Well, Krista, I am so grateful that you came and sat down. I think that Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, whoever the next Republican Speaker of the House is, and a lot of officials will want to know that CPS currently, at least in this instance, and potentially in other instances, have individuals within their department who specialize in this issue, are willing to provide materials that push parents to deny basic human biology and advance a specific transgender ideology. This isn't happening in California. It's not happening I'm saying the story that we're telling is not a California story, a New York story, Vermont, I don't know, anywhere else that you think that crazy things are happening, Washington State, Oregon, it's happening in Texas. Yeah. It's happening in our communities. And it's a sad situation. I'm grateful that we're not talking about the parents' names in this situation. The child, like I said, the child's a victim of a culture that is lying to him. And I know the parents love him, and I feel for them and the situation they're in. I'm grateful for you.
Thank you.
Because you are engaged in the fight and in the battle. So last thing I want you to tell our viewers and listeners is how can they support you, the work you do? Where can they find out more information about what you do?
So you can find us online on familyrightsadvocacy.com, on Facebook. The best thing that you can do to help your own family is if CPS comes to your door, they call you, say thank you for your concern. If I can have your business card, I'll call you back tomorrow. Call us or call an attorney. I do not think it is wise to do any CPS investigation alone because of all the things that I've witnessed. We would love for your support by liking our Facebook page or donating to our cause. We help families completely for free, and we use those funds to drive there and help them. And when a family needs services, whatever those services might look like, we deny the services through the department, and we help the family either get the services on their own or we pay for them to get them. So that's how you can help us.
Thank you for all you're doing, Krista, and thank you for being willing to come on and tell us this story.
Thank you.